Everyone. It's so good to be able to share Havdalah with all of you, whether we're sitting in our cars, in our homes, or wherever we are at this moment. The ability to gather together as community to mark the end of Shabbat is truly a blessing. And it's a blessing we wouldn't have necessarily been even thought of taking part in just a few years ago. So here we are. And I want to encourage everyone, if you could mute yourselves just while I'm playing guitar, just to try to minimize any sound problems, that'd be awesome. And we are going to move to our Havdalah service. So I get my props over here. On Shabbat, we always begin by lighting candles. And as we end Shabbat, we think back to those very first moments of welcoming in the sacredness of this day, of giving ourselves permission to have a day apart from the rest of the week, a day where we could focus on what our souls need, a day of being with friends and family, a day of doing things that sanctify our week. And as we come to this end, we light candles, reflecting on what this Shabbat has been for all of us. This braided candle coming together, marking the many varied ways in which we experience Shabbat, the varied nature of our community, and how every single one of our candles that make up the Havdalah brings a little bit more light into our worlds. And with that, we prepare to say our very first blessing, which is our blessing over the grape juice or wine. As I burn myself on the candle. Hold on one second. Okay. Yeah, la 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 la. Ya la la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen borei peri hagafen. We set that grape juice or wine aside to be able to enjoy a little bit later. But first, we grab something, anything that has a beautiful smell as we turn to our blessing over the spices. La 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 la. Ya la la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei v'samim borei minei v'samim. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la ya la la ya la la ya la la. And we come back to our candle, allowing our fingernails to take in a small bit of its light, taking with us some sanctity from this day. Ya la 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 la. Ya la la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam we turn to our blessing of transition, marking the end of one week and the beginning of a new week filled with possibilities. Shavuatov, 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 Shavuatov. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. A good week, a week of peace. May gladness reign and joy increase. Return to our songs for Eliyahu the prophet. Eliyahu Hanafi, Eliyahu Hatishki, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hakilati. Bimira v'yameinu, Yavo Eleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David. Miriam HaNeviah, Oz v'Zimra v'Yada, Miriam Tirkot Hitanu, Lehagdi Zimra Tolah, Bimira v'yameinu, Iti v'yeinu, El Mei HaYeshua, El Mei HaYeshua. And we turn finally to our Shavua Tov song, wishing one another a wonderful week before we have the opportunity to dive right in to our That's So TBE program. So I invite you to join with me. Twisted candle brightens our hearts, and together we watch the Sabbath depart. Smell the spices and taste the wine. The stars in the sky begin to shine. Shavua Tov, may you have a good week. May you find the happiness you seek. Shavua Tov, may your week be fine. May it be as sweet as Sabbath wine. We say goodbye to a special friend, and now the Shabbat has come to an end. Shavua Tov are the words we speak. Say, may you have a happy week. Shavua Tov, may you have a good week. May you find the happiness you seek. Shavua Tov, may your week be fine. May it be as sweet as the Sabbath wine. Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov, everyone. So tonight we have something really special. We've been going through our decades here, first starting with the early years when we had Angela Romero here with us, teaching us to, okay, no problem, Raz, sounds good. Teaching us about just those very early days in the 1920s and a little bit of the 1930s. Last month, we were so blessed when we had Sherry who was there and and Carrie and others just talking about the 40s and the 50s of Temple Bethel history. And tonight we are so blessed to be able to pick up, starting with a little bit of the 50s, mostly talking about the 60s. Having Sherry back here with us again, Barbara Rheingold Gerlicki, who will be able to tell us about some of her memories from those years, as well as Roz Leach, who is going to be back on the screen in just a moment to be able to share her memories as well. As we prepare to hear some of their memories, I want to start by sharing some pictures that might just get us started. And some of these are pictures from things that Sherry, you sent in. Thank you so much for doing so. First of all, this is a picture that came from a newspaper on breaking ground on the religious school wing. And it lists a bunch of different people who are in this picture. Of course, there are many more who were there, who weren't in this picture, but who were present. And what really strikes me with this is that this breaking ground on the religious school wing, people came from all the various churches and places of worship in the area in order to be able to celebrate with Temple Bethel. And right there with Rabbi Halevi, right in the middle, and everyone else who is gathered around him. I took pictures of something that Sherry sent in, and I know it's very difficult to read this tiny writing. I have the originals, so we can certainly show them because Sherry so beautifully shared them with us. But these were essentially newsletters of things that went on in the Temple Bethel day camp that happens, where there were little comments that were written by campers of what they liked that they were doing, about plays that were going on, different songs they were taking part in, and a variety of other activities going on at the camp, these being sent home to kind of talk about those experiences. And this is something that I think I also shared last month that Sherry sent in back when she was Sherry Horn, right? Of some of the certificates that she got from participating in the day camp, and there were also different awards for religious school. And this picture, which is a confirmation picture in the 50s with Rabbi Halevi. Some pictures of youth group activities, which I know we started to talk a little bit about last month. And this picture right here, back when she was Sherry Horn, her bat mitzvah in 1965 with Rabbi Hellman at the time, just to get a feel of what that looked like. So those are just some of the pictures to be able to share. And now what I'd love to do is just to be able to open it up for all of you to kind of share some of your memories. And I just would love to invite for you, Barbara and Roz, and you also, Sherry, as you want to jump in here to talk a little bit about what it was like being a child in the Temple Bethel Religious School at this time and just sharing your experiences. Barbara, do you want to start?
Okay. When we moved to San Pedro, it was 1955. I was 7, not quite 8. So I missed that particular day camp, although I did do some day camp activities in ensuing years at the temple. We were still in the house, converted house at 19th and Cabrillo. And different rooms were used as classrooms. We had mimeographed service there, but I always felt welcomed. But it was very exciting to move into our new building. It was a 1-story building, a little differently planned out from the way it is now. It was an L-shaped building, and we had a whole wing of classrooms, and they had, this is important, louvered windows. They were glass windows that were like slatty ones. I'll tell you why it was important in a minute. They also had, maybe Sherry remembers, cork bulletin boards, and these were really thick, dark cork. And it was all that we could do not to dig our fingers in if we happened to be sitting in a seat right next to the cork bulletin boards. The reason I mentioned the slatted windows was about a year or so into our being at the current site, some of the grown-ups who were supposed to lock up the temple did not check the classrooms, and they got reined in. Meanwhile, parents are dropping off their kids for 9:30 Sunday school the next day. And of course, no cell phones in those days. So after the kids were dropped off, teachers and Rabbi Halevi, it was at the time, may he rest, they discovered that the classrooms were flooded. So he had us in the sanctuary, which is now our social hall, for 2.5 hours. By chance, there was a boy who had recently become bar mitzvah. And that's when we heard about this new ceremony called bas mitzvah. And I went home and I told my parents, I want to do it, which I did. However, there were 2 girls older than I in the class ahead of me. There was Susie Kaplan and Carol Ornstein. So because of their ages, they got to do it first. But, and here I am still connected to Temple Bethel. So obviously it's done something right. Sherry, do you want to share some of your memories of being a child at Temple Bethel?
I shared my pictures, and I don't have a lot of memories other than the pictures. That's what helped me remember the times that we had. I've looked at them over the years to remember so many of my friends that did it with me, the Landys and the Mandels and all those people that were there for that time. It was home. It just was home. You know, it was very special.
That's true. I remember we had children's seders. I also remember Simchat Torah. Rabbi Halevi had different groups of people marching around with the flags, etc. Just a lot of the ceremonies and things. Now, as I recall, our Friday night services started about 8:30 because initially there was no Harbor Freeway going all the way down to San Pedro. That came later. You had to take Western Avenue all the way into Los Angeles. And since some of the parents, especially the dads in those days, they might work out of town, they waited so they'd have enough people for a minyan, etc. So we had late services. We had Sunday school from kindergarten. I don't think we had a preschool. We had kindergarten through 6th grade on Sunday. And then on Saturdays, we had Saturday school. So that was 6th, 7th, 8th, and sometimes 9th and 10th. And then confirmation, I think, was either a Monday or Tuesday night. So that's a little bit different from what we have now. Rosalyn, are you able to share some things about when you were
I'm trying to get myself online.
Okay, all right, well, take your time.
No, that's okay. I too remember the louvered windows and the cork bulletin boards, but my earliest memories of the temple are actually on 19th and Cabrillo, and it wasn't a converted house. It was a building that was built by the sisterhood. And I have all that paperwork with the deeds and the plans and everything else that are in the books that I have found in the temple. So that stuff will be out and around when I can get it organized and displayed. The property belonged to a community member who gave it to the sisterhood and deeded it over to them so that they could build that building.
Oh, and here I always thought it was a house because the
No,
classrooms
it
were like
never
bedrooms.
happened. It was built specifically as Temple Bethel. And but I remember going to Sunday school there because we would sit in different corners of that room because all it was one big room.
We were in the kitchen. 3rd grade was in the kitchen when I started there.
There was a teeny tiny kitchen in there as well, but not much else. And I remember too, the first time we got to go to religious school in the new building was very exciting. It was 1 floor, and when you walked in the building and you turned left, the office was on one side and our little tiny classrooms, and I do mean little tiny, were on the other
for
side.
room 1. Except for room 1. Room 1 was
right.
Library,
Correct.
We also
It had a dual
Hebrew
purpose.
school.
Is that what you're saying, Sherry?
It was used as a library, that room, wasn't it?
Eventually it was converted to an office, and then they may have also used it as a library.
Yeah, but because at the very beginning, there wasn't much space in that area at all.
And we had Rabbi Hellman came in. He was a fairly young rabbi in his 30s. I remember my parents being very excited when he joined us. And after a short while, he hired Art Margulies, may he rest. Now, Art was a public school principal, and he was kind of a tough cookie. But Jewish man, and he had the foresight to really help turn the Sunday school into a religious school. And when
Yeah.
I and Theta Gainan and Joanne, who were the two oldest Gainan girls, were of confirmation age or even before that, he asked us to be student assistants. They didn't use the term madrachim in those days, or madrachot. And we were so happy. We were all interested in becoming teachers. We would have done it for free, but he said, no, teachers don't make enough as it is. So we got a salary, and our salary was 50 cents an hour. So I earned $12 a month when I started working at Temple Bethel. But that was my first paid job other than babysitting.
Yeah,
So
I
that was-
remember when they started with the assistants. That was during Art's time.
And
And we also,
his wife was my religious school teacher. Miriam, what's her name? Miriam Margolis? Pretty sure.
I think so. I
Yeah.
think so.
and then they started having, before that, they didn't have that many bar bat mitzvah services a year, but they decided, Rabbi Hellman also decided, and I happened to be in the, I think it was the 6th grade or end of the 5th grade, when they started a Hebrew class. The first teacher we
Oh
had,
yeah.
Mrs. Pascal, was married to an Israeli, and we learned Ashkenazic Hebrew. And about a year and a half later, I became bat mitzvah. But in the meantime, because we had double session in my school, my elementary was across the street from the temple, 7th Street, and then or I'd come up from the junior high when I went to junior high school, I would start helping the younger students with their Hebrew, and I'd bring candy. And to this day, that's one of the reasons that I do the candy, because I say Jewish learning is sweet. I also used to sit, after my bat mitzvah, I would sit at the back of what's now the social hall, and I would do the same thing that numerous rabbis and cantors and Hebrew teachers have done for years, slower and louder as the students practice their Torah portion. We had one student, you remember Eddie Scher?
Very
Oh
much.
yeah.
Okay, Eddie had a yo-yo, and I'll never forget, Rabbi said he was going to check his pocket before the bar mitzvah service. Another student, the rabbi said, carry the Torah as if it's a football and you're Mr. Touchdown.
Just don't throw it down, right? We
Don't
don't want
throw it.
that.
Don't throw
But
it down.
But Barbara, I want to give a little context to some of the things that you said, just in terms of the larger world of Reform Judaism at this time. I can't speak to the history at Temple Bethel specifically. The three of you could do that so much better than I ever could. But the history of the Reform movement as a whole, I can give some insight into. So there's reasons why there weren't that many bar mitzvah at that time. And one of the reasons was in Reform Judaism, there was this belief that the bar mitzvah was an outdated ceremony. It no longer really had meaning, because the meaning is really when students are about to graduate and go off to their next endeavor, to be able to have some sort of confirmation at that point when they're a little bit older, that could be done in a much more egalitarian way, that could be done in a way that brought in a whole lot more English. That really was the focus of Reform Judaism at the time. And it actually started to change a little bit in the 60s in particular. It started kind of moving back to adopting bat mitzvah and bar mitzvah. And I think part of that is actually because of the first bat mitzvah that had taken place, that was starting to kind of catch on. Like, wait a second, maybe there is an egalitarian way to do this too. Maybe the bat mitzvah does still have meaning. Maybe we can do both confirmation and bat mitzvah. But that just gives a little context into what was going on there. The other piece is that Reform Judaism early on was not a Zionist movement. And that began to change at around the same time that Reform Judaism started to say, you know what, actually, Israel is a state now. We do want to support it. We want to stand behind it. And that really was very much in the 50s and certainly in the 60s that was picking up.
Although
Yes,
I will tell you that at all the high holy days, there was always the appeal, not for the temple so much, but for Israel bonds. I don't know if Roz and Sherry remember that. Rabbi, I'm glad you brought up how much Hebrew or English was used, because most of the time that I was at San Pedro Bethel in those years, we did the prayers in English and in Hebrew. And one of the things, I don't know if I mentioned it last time, was if you were 6th grade and above, you were expected to learn, even if you didn't know Hebrew, you had to learn the Baruch, Shema, and a couple of other persons, Mi Chamocha. And about every 6 weeks, you led part of the Shabbat morning service. That was the last hour of the religious school. And we also had to write sermonettes, and we'd have to come in the week before or 2 weeks before and work with Rabbi Hellman so he could see that we were working on it and it made sense. Hebrew.
That's
Yeah.
great. Wait, hold on one second. Sherry, did you want to say something about Israel bonds in particular?
No, I remembered my Hebrew teacher's name was Bilha Ophir. Did you remember Bilha?
Mrs. Ofer, yeah.
Yeah, she was from Israel, and probably the first Israeli I ever met, but she was a tough teacher. I remember that.
And that's when they switched from Ashkenazic to Sephardic Hebrew. That
Right,
became more the
right.
standard.
Right, because in Israel, it's the Sephardic pronunciation. And so Zionism really aligned with that.
I talked about Israel bonds last week and how that was the focus of my dad, especially.
Yeah.
He got these people that had never been involved in the temple who were Jewish that he found that came and helped and supported Israel very strongly.
Yeah. Oh, Roz, you're muted. Can you unmute so we can hear you?
Yeah, sorry, we changed devices. I'm confused. I remember when they put the Israeli flag up in the sanctuary social hall for
Yeah.
the first time, and we had both the Israeli flag and the American flag. There had been one at the old building, but then it kind of disappeared for a while. And then in the probably 57 or so, I remember seeing it back in the new building for the first time.
And in the picture, Sherry, that you sent, here, I'll go back to it.
On the bar mitzvah picture.
You can see, yeah. Can you see? Well, it's a little bit cut off,
Yeah,
but both flags are present in this picture.
that's all
Yeah.
I remember.
You can't really see it, but it is there. I promise.
The other thing is that Barbara and Sandy, and I don't remember who the third girl is that got bat mitzvahed. I mean, the rest of us hadn't studied enough Hebrew and really weren't involved in the Hebrew programs at all because the boys all got bar mitzvahed, no matter what. I remember that very clearly. But the girls just didn't do that.
It was a choice.
Well, that's what I said.
Yeah,
So
it started to become a choice even more, Sherry, for you than for me. Barbara was the unusual one when she was bat mitzvahed.
one girl with 12 boys, all younger.
Yeah.
So did you face any pushback when you wanted to do that, Barbara?
No, I went home and I told my parents I'd like to, and I'm the oldest of the children and the grandchildren and the great grandchildren. So I guess they encouraged. Now, in those days that we may have mentioned last time, bat mitzvah or bas mitzvah was on Friday night. So the women came up and lit the candles. We read some prayers in Hebrew, but like I remember, we didn't do Haftarah in Hebrew. And I think we just read the Haftarah blessings in English, but we did the Torah blessings and we gave a talk, etc. And in my case, because my service was on Friday night, I went to Saturday school the next day and did the whole thing over for the Shabbat morning service with a lot less nervousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was.
There
my
was
a momentous occasion because I was a very nervous kid. And I was talking to Carrie Waterman beforehand, and she wrote me this lovely letter, which I didn't include. She said, "Why are you so nervous? All your friends are going to be there. It'll be fine." The crowns fell off the Torah in the middle of the service when they had them on. I was like, okay, I can die now. So then after that, they had a little button that they put on there so they couldn't fall off. So, because it was kind of a big deal.
So you made it better for everyone after you.
Apparently. It's pretty funny.
Go ahead, Roz. What did you want to say?
No, I was just going to say, and those crowns were a big deal because they'd been donated. And I have it down on some of the paperwork on some of the stuff we're going to put in the book. I have down when the crowns and the breastplates and the pointers were all donated. And that was like such an amazing thing to see those and hear the little bells ring and everything. So everybody knew those were a really big deal. And to make sure nothing happened.
Now, I wanted to mention that at that time, at least when I became bat mitzvah, was 1961. We'd never had a cantor in the years I was there. We had cantorial soloists, some Jewish, some not. We had a wonderful one, Don Ogren, and we had Mrs. Balsley, who played the piano or the organ for us. And
they were Jewish.
They were with us for years, so they were very much attuned. But occasionally we'd have a guest cantor come in or whatever, and if they were running late, occasionally Rabbi would say, Barbara, can you start the service? Or so-and-so has to leave early. Can you end the service? So I knew enough of the blessings that we do at the beginning, at the end, I could do that. But I don't even recall when we got our first cantor. Maybe Roz does.
I've got it. I'm not home, unfortunately.
Okay. And
So
we
I
have
don't
men
any of this
and
in
women
front of me,
cantors there.
But I have a whole list of all of the people that have been cantor, and
Or
Don,
cantorial soloist. Most
yes,
were
or
cantorial
cantorial
soloists.
soloist. Don stopped at around,
When John
I want to say 1980 or something
No.
like that. No, not that,
Because
not that late, a little
Not that
earlier.
late.
started, there were others. Not-
A little bit earlier, but we had Don for a long time. Don was with us, I think, over 25 years, as was Lois Balsley with us over 25 years.
You played the organ. We had an organ.
We had the organ. We had the choir
Yes.
loft.
Yep.
Right.
Which is very classic reform. Even though Temple Bethel was not reform in those early years, didn't become a part of the reform movement until I believe the 50s,
Right.
like officially. I don't
Now,
remember
at
the exact year.
High Holy Days, they would have an early morning service. I think somebody mentioned that last time.
Yeah.
They would have a traditional, more Orthodox service. So they would start at like 8 in the morning. The rest of
Yeah.
us would get there around 11, I think.
Some of my research tells who started it and when it started. So I have all that, unfortunately, at home, not here, but I will be sharing that when we're sharing all of the write-ups. We're putting together a written documentation of all this, so we've got it.
That's wonderful.
And we've got an add-on to the notebooks that Ida Firmus and my mom put together are amazing. And I found those. So we're going through all of those, and we'll be updating and putting in a lot of pictures on our website that will then be transferred over so people can see them. But they include a lot of that information.
Roz, I wanted to ask you, I think we talked about this a little bit. Girls did not wear a kippah or a head covering or a talit until way after I
not
became
at
bat
all.
mitzvah.
I did not have one.
I had a shawl that I
No.
used to use. That was it.
When I became bat mitzvah as an adult, that was the first time I ever put a kippah or a talis on. And in fact, that was the first time I ever got up on the bima and actually looked at the Torah scroll close up. I had never gone up on the bima or looked at the scrolls before. I was saying one of the things I remembered from the picture that Sherry showed were the lecterns that had all the blue and silver printing on them with the Magen Davids and all of that. Those were the lecterns for years and years until the new sanctuary came in.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we were not chanting Torah on those days. We were just reading Torah.
Right.
And that was
Right.
that
There
just
was
the way it
never
was.
chanting.
So Judaism, in some way, we've gone back in Reform Judaism to some of the traditions that they had gone away from, as Rabbi was saying earlier.
Yeah, it was like not doing the Haftorahs.
Mm-hmm.
And the girls certainly didn't do them.
Roz, your parents are at Green Hills, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah, because I go there frequently and I see the Firmuses, and I'll check out your parents when I'm there.
Yeah, the whole neighborhood is there. They've got them all lined up.
It's
That's where everybody's going to be, apparently, because when they first bought that cemetery section, the Brickmans, the Reeses, my parents, and a number of others all got together and all bought them all lined up. So there's a whole group over there. It's really kind of funny.
You know, Roz and I were talking once about all the confirmation pictures that are up in the hallway. And you can go and see, as Roz says, what you were the last class whose picture was
We
black
were
and
the
white.
last class in black and white, and my children love to show everybody that. And the funny thing is that I'm on the wall, but so are both of my kids. So it's very exciting.
Yeah.
It is.
For us, when we became confirmed, we had a service, and sometimes I think it was on a Sunday rather than on a Friday or Saturday, but I remember wearing robes and we all carried white flowers. I still, to this day,
Yes.
on my in my nightstand is a little copy of the Bible that I have with teeny tiny print inscribed with my name, and I carried it when I got married
Wow.
at
Yes.
the temple, of course.
And you
Yes.
mentioned, like in studying confirmation, that there were things from the wider community that had influence on those confirmation classes. Do you want to
Yes.
talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and maybe Sherry can relate to this. My brother was 6 years younger, and so he was in confirmation, I believe, in 1966, which is when I graduated high school. And there,
Earlier than that, or
okay,
because he was younger than I was, and I was in 66.
maybe he was, okay, maybe it was a little, you were in 66, maybe he,
Yeah.
okay, maybe it was later then, maybe I'm counting wrong. But anyhow, there was a high school teacher, 10th grade teacher, Mr. Goldberg.
Uh-huh.
He was hired to teach the 10th grade confirmation class. And I'm thinking that he taught the kids maybe an hour on a weeknight, and then the rabbi with them also. But that was the
Taught high
year,
school too. Yeah, he taught it.
that was the year that Star Trek came out for the first time. And all the kids were watching Star Trek. And that's what they wanted to talk about when they got to their religious schools. Kind of like my students now, they want to talk about the latest video game or whatever. So what Mr. Goldberg did was he would talk about the episode and they go over it in case anybody missed it. And then he would bring out Jewish values and ethics, etc.
Yeah.
And the story I heard from my parents, not to do Lashon Hara, was that some parents would say to their kids on the way home or whatever, well, what did you do tonight? What did you study? And they said, Star Trek. So all of a sudden, one day, Mr. Goldberg was no longer their teacher, because some parents had decided that you shouldn't be discussing Star Trek at your religious school. Things have changed a little bit now, I think, as far as what we talk about and how we can relate the outside world to Judaism, etc.
Yeah, I think he taught for a couple of years though, because I actually had him my senior year at the high school. And he had also been a teacher at the religious school at that time. So I think it was a couple of years.
Maybe it was later. And I had mentioned to Rabbi, I wanted to show you something. In the 50s and 60s in America, there was a movement called the God is Dead movement. And at one point, I believe it, pretty certain it was Tosby, the youth group, and we had these t-shirts. And it says, God is alive and well and living at Bethel. Unfortunately, one day I washed this, I think, in hot water, so it shrunk. So I had to give it to my little sister, but I still have that. I plan to frame it and give it to the temple. But we definitely were discussing and thinking about what other people in other religions and cultures were saying at the time. So we, even though we were down at the end of the freeway, et cetera, we weren't so isolated that we couldn't relate to things that were going on in the world.
We had pins that said that too.
No, I don't.
And
remember
I think I have one in the house. I've got to double check what's in my stack of things I'm still going through. There were also a group of us that decided we wanted to do a comparative religion class, and my confirmation class had 7 kids in it, which for Bethel was pretty decent size. And 4 of us got together and we went to every church in San Pedro for services. And then we went to somebody's house and discussed it for hours on end and the differences and everything. It was just really fascinating. You know, and a couple of the kids came from families where there was kind of a mixed family situation. So they could tell us more about what we had seen and all that stuff. And I remember going to one of the churches and having a very blatantly anti-Semitic sermon given that day. And we just kind of snuck out the back at the end. We didn't want anybody to know we'd been there.
Do you remember one year the temple was under construction maybe, and we had to have services at the church?
Oh, we had several high holy days that we had.
Yeah.
In fact, the church behind us, it was a heat wave. The air conditioning gave out. So we went to First Presbyterian and they threw a sheet over the cross, and some of the kids, we
Right.
called it the Holy Ghost.
Yeah, I think we went to the Mormon temple one time too. We were going there for a while, in fact.
I don't remember that. Roz and I used to carpool together to go to religious school.
Yes, we did. We lived around the
We lived
corner
on
from each
I
other.
lived on Upper Upland. She lived on Lower Upland. Yeah, it was very cute.
Oh, do either of you remember creative services? Because TOSB, the former name of the youth group, it was Temple of San Pedro Youth. We used to do about once a year a creative service. And I remember for my bat mitzvah, somebody had given me a set of pens, regular ink pens. And I remember writing each person's part in a different color, but we incorporated some of the basic prayers, but then we wrote our own for a Friday night service.
Some of the things that are in the books that I have that Ida and my mom did include some of that. And some of the things I found that were actually being thrown away that were from TOSB are in notebooks that I put together that hopefully we'll be able to find soon. Unfortunately, Elliot Bruner had them and we're not sure where they are right now, but we had some of that information and a lot of TOSB information and conclave newsletters and things like that. And a lot of skifty information.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, the conclave were like the gathering of the different Jewish youth groups from the different city and an area. And we would occasionally go to LA or wherever, crammed into cars. That those days you didn't even have seatbelt laws, as I recall. Think about 8 to 10 people in a VW. But we had fun. And that's how we got to meet other Jewish people outside of our community. That and
we also hosted a couple of conclaves during my time in TOSB, and I know before me and after me, we sponsored big programs that included kids from all over the city.
Yeah, that's like us doing BBG and AZA.
Right.
We'd go to near Talmud, or we'd go to some place where we'd get to, because there were no Jewish boys in San Pedro in my age, so that was kind of exciting.
Well, anybody that was there was in your Sunday school class. They were more like your brothers than anybody you ever wanted to date. You just knew them too well.
That's true. There's that too.
Now with me, I was there was one other girl, and that was it in my graduating class. I was a winter class. So it was Margot Landy and I, but we had gone to different elementaries and we didn't really know each other that well. By the time, Roz, your class, I don't know if you were in with my sister Irene or not, were there more people in your like public school classes or not very many still?
No, I was at San Pedro High. There were, I think, a total of about 4 of us.
Okay.
And that was it.
How about and Sherry, same thing?
Yeah, pretty much. There weren't very many, and it was pretty much okay after Vatican II. Before Vatican II was not too good.
It was not so, yes, that's true. It was, I would not tell people I was Jewish. And I remember I had a boyfriend in junior high who gave me a St. Christopher medal to wear to show we were going steady. And I brought that home. I thought my father was going to kill me. It didn't mean anything to me. I didn't think it was important. And he said, "You're not wearing something like that. That's Christian. Are you crazy?"
That's tough.
That was the end of that. I gave it back to him.
Well, one thing, because Temple Bethel was really like a second home to so many of us, and because there were so few of us, if you knew enough about Judaism, you were there, you studied, you learned and everything, then we could go out and speak and talk about Judaism to others. When I was in my senior year of high school, I went to the Girl Scout National Roundup in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and we were on a train for a couple of days. And somebody found out that I was Jewish. And just as I'd done a few years before when I went to Girl Scout camp in Catalina, I was sitting explaining Judaism to, in that case, about, I don't know, there are about 30 to 50 girls in the boxcar, but I felt confident enough to do it. And that's because of what I learned and what everything that excited me about Judaism from Temple Bethel.
Yeah, I did the same thing. Kids would ask all the time and they were astounded that you were Jewish. And I remember that we couldn't go into the Catholic church and the Catholic kids couldn't come into the temple. That was not allowed until Vatican II. And there was a whole lot of discussion. Well, you know, what do they do at your temple? What do you do? What do you mean you don't kneel? That's weird. You know, no, we don't kneel. Didn't understand it. It was very interesting.
Hmm.
I'd walk home from 7th Street and there was a house on the first street that we had to cross where they had catechism classes. And
Right.
the kids had, they called it release time. Now we Jewish kids, if we wanted to, and our parents wanted to, either we or our parents could come in and talk about the Jewish holidays. My mom used to use a booklet that was published by Anti-Defamation League, and it was called Your Neighbor Celebrates. And we would bring that in and talk about it. And if, put it this way, if God had arranged it so that Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur was on the first day of public school in September, then we were allowed to go for 1 hour just to show our faces, make certain that the teachers knew that we existed. And after that, we left, went to temple.
Oh, I didn't even go to school. My parents wouldn't let me. But my mother came to school every year until I hit junior high school and made latkes and taught dreidel games to every single one of my classes. And the kids were always fascinated. And then the other thing I remember is we used to swap lunches all the time because they always had stuff I never had in my house. And I would bring stuff they'd never heard of.
So it's really interesting of all of you talking about Vatican II and how that made such a big difference. I wasn't even thinking about the timing of that, but that was in the early 60s,
Right,
I think it was
right?
1961 or 2, something like that. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, but the thing is, in the picture that I showed earlier, here I'll go back to it, of the breaking ground, that was in the 50s, wasn't it?
Yes.
No.
No?
Oh, no,
Yes,
it
it
was. I'm
was.
sorry. It was
And that's in the 50s. That's in the 50s.
1950.
That's 55.
55, the building, because I went to first grade in the new building. They broke ground in 55 and it opened in 56.
56.
That there was someone in a position at the Catholic Church who was there taking part in breaking ground. And in
Well,
the context of what you're talking about, that's really interesting.
Yeah, but I don't think he went inside.
Well, there was no
Yeah,
inside
that
to go
was-
into, right?
That was Monsignor Scott, who I remember hearing about all the time. And Reverend Christensen was from the
Yes.
church across the street of the temple.
Right. Roz, I remember your parents, your mom was so sweet. And Sherry, what was your mom's first name?
Erna,
Okay, now was there a Matilda also?
my grandmother.
That's
yeah.
her
Okay,
grandmother.
that's who it was. Okay, now I've got that.
Matilda was part of the founding women from the Women's Sisterhood.
Yeah, I told you she came in 1923.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's when she got married.
Amazing.
It's pretty
Yeah, and
early
that's
on.
when the Corn family was here in the early 20s, and my aunt came in the late 30s or 40s, because she and my uncle got married, and then the rest of the Furman family came after that. But my uncle owned a hardware store, and his father owned it before him down on 6th Street, a block up from Shanghai Reds.
Yep, I remember Shanghai Reds too.
Yeah, I do too. We were never allowed to get anywhere near there.
Well, yeah, the downtown, the area right before they did the what was it called when they
Urban renewal.
urban renewal on Fifth and Harbor. It was pretty bad. My father had a liquor store down there, so it was pretty bad.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. I got to add that to my notes. Yeah, because everything up and down 6th Street, there were Jewish merchants
Mhm.
all the way up and down 6th Street, from the 100 block where Hirschman's Drug and Judy Kaplan's drug store were,
Right.
and then my uncle's store, and
Robinson's
Ben
Union War.
Levin was across the street, had a shoe repair store. B.B. Lippman's store was next to my uncle's. And then up the block, and the next block was Union War Surplus, but that was later. And that was the K Brothers.
And
And then in the block above that was Cooper's Department Store, Yale Waterman's, Brown Brothers, and Sam Martin's. And those were all
That's right.
clothing stores.
That's right. And when we came to San Pedro, it was mainly because my dad was the CPA for the Papadakis family.
Ah,
And
I
they were
never
also
knew
on
that.
6th Street.
Wow.
Yeah, 6th Street was the center of all the shopping and everything in downtown. It really was the central area that everybody went to.
Yeah, there was
It's amazing.
the Strand movie theater and
And the Warner.
the Warner.
And of course, the Warner, and there was a third one too that was over by First Street. Strand was over by 22nd and, no, not 22nd, sorry. Like 11th or 12th and I think Pacific. And then going the other way near First and Pacific, there was another movie theater.
And in those days, it was like 50 cents or something to get in. And I remember when I turned 12, I was so excited I was going to have the adult ticket. My parents going, shh.
Yeah, exactly.
But those days that your parents might drop you off and you'd stay for a double feature with cartoons at the beginning or a
Exactly.
newsreel, that was it. Different
Yeah.
times. Well,
Well,
I am seeing in my students' families some of the connections that our families had when we were growing up. And so my hope is that as we start the second 100 years, that we keep having families that have this wonderful connection.
And that's a good segue because it's exactly the question I was just going to ask, right? We've been so blessed to learn from you over the past several minutes about what it was like to grow up at Temple Bethel in the 50s and in the 60s and 70s, and just seeing and knowing how the greater things that were going on in the world and the Jewish community at the time had an impact on your Jewish identity and your experiences at Temple. Seeing everything going on in the world today and having this strong connection with Temple Bethel, what are your wishes for the children who are growing up right now who are the future of our community?
One of my hopes is that the kids in the youth groups continue to stay very involved with NIFTY and do things on the regional level. That made such an incredible difference for me. And I saw that in my kids as well. And it ended up making it so that my boys both wanted to do camp in the summer. And then they did the NIFTY in Israel program for a semester of high school, because they were so intrigued with all of that. And they are still in touch with kids that they met through NIFTY. And they're very good friends with a lot of those kids. And the kids that grew up with my boys, there's a number of them that live out in the Silver Lake and the Eagle Rock neighborhoods of the city. They all get together and they see each other and they do things together. And they celebrate holidays together. So it's really, really wonderful to know that that generation is doing stuff. And they come to Bethel now and then, but there's some of them live so far away, the kids are going to religious school up in that area instead.
But your hope is that the kids today will be able to take advantage of and will choose to take advantage of all of those wonderful things that our movement has to offer.
Absolutely.
What about you, Sherry and Barbara? Barbara, you started answering the question
Well,
before I asked it, so you have a chance after I asked it.
really just the things that, for example, that I've been teaching the students, from how to lead a Torah service, even at the young age of 8 and 9 years old, that they see that there's a purpose for it and a meaning, and they want to continue and they get excited about that. And other Jewish traditions, that they see that Judaism, as a Jewish American or American Jew, and this is one of the things I'll do with 5th graders, think of a bicycle. Are you the wheel in the front or the wheel in the back? Which one is your Jewish wheel? Which is your American wheel? But that you can be both, and that you can live the world, but live Jewishly in the world. So and just that they maintain, God willing, maintain this temple. Because I always tell everybody it's a magnet.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Can I add something? I
Of
wasn't
course,
around
Don.
the 50s here, but I want to credit one thing. And obviously, as a family, we have part of the credit. But all three of our kids are still involved. My daughter, as you know, Cassie, is the assistant director of a 500 child Jewish preschool in one of the biggest synagogues in America. Both my boys, their kids are involved, and they are involved. One with a JCC that acts as a synagogue, one obviously who does stuff in the South Bay with both Bethel and Chabad. And the thing is that they got their base, they got their Jewishness, their Yiddishkeit, if you will, at Bethel. It's so deep in them that, when they went off to college, they went to Hillel. They really, I would say, their tight circles of friends are all Jewish. They're kids they grew up with and interacted with and have stayed friends with, 35, 40 years later. And to me, I see them imbuing their own children with these things, right down to the fact that my youngest son is married to a woman who's not Jewish, and yet Friday night they light candles, they say the prayers, they have gone to Jewish preschools and continue, already to go to Sunday school and all of that. And they got it, they learned it at Bethel.
Yep.
They got it reinforced at home, but they learned it at Bethel, and they made their friends there. And, again, in their 40s and 50s, they are still carrying on those traditions that they learned when they were little kids. And so my wish is, I guess, that it continues, that it passes not only to the next generation of my grandkids, and hopefully one day great grandkids, but that our new young families, and I'm happy to say I see that growth, that we can continue to do that kind of thing so that we have Jewish families 2, 3, that down the road, because I see that diminishing. And I get so excited when I see, and I'm so happy that we're so open to our families that are mixed families, because when I see that and I see both parents involved, I realize that the warmth that comes from Bethel so often is helping to create that non-Jewish spouse into someone who sees the values of not only Judaism, but of the family of Temple Bethel. And so I think we're doing a great job, and I only hope that we can continue to do what we've been doing.
Well, thank you so much for that. Sherry, is there anything you wanted to say?
Oh, I can say amen to that. I'm very happy just to have these connections tonight, and certainly belonging to Temple Bethel, all of my childhood was very warm and has allowed me to give to my family, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, thank you all so much for being here, for telling us about so much of Temple Bethel's rich history that we otherwise wouldn't know about. So I'm so grateful for all of you taking the time. wherever we all are. And we're scattered all over the place tonight, aren't we? What a
Yep.
blessing
Oh,
that
yeah.
we could be here doing this together. And thank you for everyone who came just to learn and to be in community with everyone else. It's truly a blessing to be able to do that. Um,
Also, just so you know, part of what we're doing as the 100th history committee is I'm working as a historian, I guess, like my mom did. And I think I'm going to try and continue that to make sure we keep recording what has gone on in the temple and we fill in the gaps. But I have found an incredible amount of information that we will make sure ends up being posted. If it's not in this book that's being written, it will be, hopefully we'll use the display cases in the temple and get information out there. There's an incredible number of pictures from the old building and from the 7th Street building after each of the renovations were done. It's really exciting to find all that. We finally got a complete list of all the sisterhood presidents, all the temple presidents. I believe we have all the educators and all the cantors, and we even have some of the choirs that were part of the temple. And of course, we've got all the rabbis. So it's really exciting. I'm working right now on a list of the office managers and all the people that work the office. So hopefully we'll have all that information and people will be able to look at it.
Well, thank you for all the work you're doing on that, Roz. And I know there's a whole committee of people who are working so hard to put that
Yeah.
together, and we're truly grateful to every single one of you. I want to thank you all so much for this evening. We are going to have another That's So TBE Havdalah coming up next month. However, the date escapes me at the moment, but it will be advertised. So look for that. And we're going to be talking next month about the 70s. So I hope to see you for those years. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Hope everyone has a Shavua Tov.
Shabbat Tov.
Hi, Shelley.